Hello, good afternoon. Am I on audio? I believe so. My name is Ariel Hauge. I'm Deputy Director of the Independent Evaluation Office here at UNDP. On behalf of our office and the UN Evaluation Group, have the pleasure of welcoming a number of people here in the conference room, also a number virtually. I'm not going to ask we introduce all and individually ourselves. Colleagues are here from UNDP, from other agencies, and from the evaluation office. I'd like to introduce to you our speaker today, our very own Juha Ito. I'm not going to give extensive background to the Global Environment Facility, of which he is Director of the Independent Evaluation Office. Most of you will be familiar with Juha's past as well, with engagement with the environment sector, development sector. We most recently had him for Brown Bag here on the occasion of his recent book on environment and development. Juha is a visiting professor at Rutgers University and has a distinguished career in the evaluation field and happens to be my predecessor in this office as well. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Juha then to give us the short story of how in the recent cycle of GEF Council deliberations and recent evaluation work, what he can share with us. What we will do after his presentation, we will have a round with virtual colleagues or questions, but also in the room here for questions, reflections. You are welcome, and here we go.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Ariel. And on this interesting day of November 8th, when many things are happening in the United States, actually, so I'm not sure that it's a good commendation to say that you know about my past. but anyway, it's great to be here back in the old conference room in the Daily News building in New York. And I'm very grateful to both the UNEG and to UNDP Independent Evaluation Office for hosting me. So I was thinking of talking a little bit about what we are doing in the Independent Evaluation Office of the GEF by way of a comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, which we are in the middle of currently. I hope this resonates with some of you, and not least with the UNDP IEO, because I know that you are starting the evaluation of the strategic plan of UNDP, and there's many things that are similar in many ways, and I hope that I'll be able to highlight some of the what I hope to be seen as innovations methodologically and approach-wise in the evaluations that we do. You see, I suppose, the outline of my talk on the screen, so I won't go through it, but I will just jump into the first title item. And basically, the thing is that the GEF, as you may know, is a trust fund, and it operates really on the basis of grant financing mostly, although we do have a non-grant instrument also. But when it comes to grant financing, obviously the money has to come from somewhere, so we operate on the basis of a 4-year replenishment cycle. And the replenishment cycle, we are actually in the middle of the 6th replenishment of the GEF. So this is the year 25 of the GEF. And we're in the middle of the 6th replenishment, and the negotiations for the 7th replenishment will start in March. next spring, and it's anticipated that they will be finalized by September 2018. So it's almost like a year and a half process to negotiate the funding envelope for the GEF. And the replenishment negotiations always they start with the programmatic directions, and every replenishment cycle has a slightly different configuration of how the GEF will be operating the next time. And as a very essential, and I would say very, very central part of the replenishment cycle is a comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, which is called OPS. Why not? Comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, OPS. And there have been 5 OPSs before, and this is the 6th one that we have already started. And these are the objectives of the OPS. It's basically to provide evaluative evidence to inform the negotiations and to assess the extent to which GEF is achieving its objectives, and assess the relevance of the GEF in the changing landscape of environmental finances. As you know, for example, especially in the area of climate finance, the landscape is rather crowded these days already, and you have, for example, the new Green Climate Fund that has been established, that is already in operation, and that UNDP has already gotten some projects out of. But there's the climate investment funds managed by the World Bank. There's a large number of different funds. So one of our objectives is to try to find out what is the niche of the GEF in this thing. So we are looking at both issues related to the relevance of the GEF and its global contributions in this landscape, and we are looking at the project performance and program performance and impact. So has the GEF been actually changing the world as it set out to do, and under what circumstances, and how the programs and projects have been performing, but then also this broader issue of the GEF. So this is a comprehensive evaluation. So we have about 20 sub-evaluations and studies that we are conducting. Some of them have been already completed and the council, including the first one was this evaluation of the GEF CSO network that we presented to the council in June, and now in Washington Council we already presented the findings of International Waters Focal Area Study and also a value for money analysis of land degradation. And I'm going to come more to these two because I think that we have some interesting approaches as well as findings from there. We're going to do all the focal areas of the GEF, and we are going to do things related to organizational and institutional aspects, such as how does the GEF involve the private sector and so forth. And the idea is that, so I said that the replenishment negotiations start in March. We will have early findings of all of these evaluations to inform the first negotiation in March, but you know, many of these evaluations to be able to be completed will have to go on, but by September next year, we expect to have the full report at hand. Here's another slide where this is the status of the countries that we have visited in context of OPS 6 now. There are still large black areas, but I hope that we will be able to complete some of them also in the coming 3 to 6 months. But so far we have already visited something like 40 countries in this round. So let me get into the next thing, and I really wanted to highlight some of these approaches that we are using and the methodologies, because I think that we are, you know, modestly, as a modest guy, I can say that we are innovating here. And we are using different kinds of technological approaches, both quantitative and qualitative methods and so forth. But the whole thing is based in a kind of systems thinking. So instead of evaluating just an intervention in isolation, we are looking into how the intervention fits in the broader landscape. OPS 5, the previous comprehensive evaluation, one of its conclusions was the fact that the GEF gets about $1 billion a year for global environmental funding for public sources, and of course there's 5 times that amount in co-financing. If you take all of this public funding for global environmental issues, it's perhaps $10 billion a year, of which we are 10%. But it's an order of magnitude smaller than all the other public funding that goes into environmentally destructive practices from the same governments, by way of subsidies to fossil fuels, subsidies to unsustainable agriculture, and so forth. So, you know, there's a certain, what has been termed a micro-macro paradox, that you have a lot of projects that are all achieving their goals and all are doing exactly what they were set out to do, but I pardon my expression, but the world is going to hell in a handbasket, right? You can hardly see a dent in global greenhouse gas emissions, or we are facing the 6th mass extinction of species, which is, to me, probably the most horrific environmental trend we have now. So you have to place your intervention in the larger system. And obviously, you know, the intervention has a lot of, there are lots of other components in the larger system in which the intervention is operating, and the intervention is interacting with these components in different ways, and of course the components are also interacting with each other, irrespective of the intervention that you are. And you'll see emergent properties. You'll see that, like in this schematic presentation, so the intervention actually operates in a subsystem, but it is not independent of it. It is there, and it has to interact with all of these other components. So it's very important that you understand how the intervention is located there. And basically, we evaluators, we talk always about things like, you know, efficiency, effectiveness, and relevance, and impact. But really, in this kind of, and I'm quoting my predecessor, Rob Vandenberg here, who has argued quite convincingly to me that, you know, you cannot be relevant unless you make a dent. And this is a different kind of a definition of relevance than we are used to. I mean, I know in UNDP we often take relevance, meaning that something is that the intervention is in line with what the government wants to do. But if it doesn't make a difference, how relevant is it? So in that definition, relevance actually approaches impact in some ways. So we are trying to find new ways of determining how the GEF is making a difference. One of these methods is rapid impact evaluation, which we are piloting in a large, one of the major programmatic evaluations here as part of the comprehensive evaluation is that the evaluation of programmatic approaches, where our objective is basically to look at the historical record of programming in the GEF and to basically try to tease out whether the programmatic approaches that have been around, for 20 years in the GEF, starting with the International Waters Program, whether they actually produce better results than individual projects. So we are using the rapid impact evaluation method, which is a theory-based impact evaluation methodology based on systematic triangulation of expert judgments. And this is a methodology that Andy Rowe, whom you may be familiar with, who is actually a leading environmental evaluator in Canada, has developed, and we have engaged Andy to help us with this approach. The Treasury Department of Canada actually is also working on the same basis with him. So you take judgments from three distinct groups of experts with sound but different knowledges of the decision and intervention and users of the same evaluation metric, but with three distinct different judgment processes, basically. Another one, we are using geospatial and quantitative methods, and this is luckily the GEF work, when you work on things like protected areas and you work on biological and processes, it lends itself pretty well for satellite imagery uses and so on. And we piloted this first in a joint evaluation with UNDP IEO on the effectiveness of the protected areas and protected area systems to protect biodiversity. But we are using this now further in different levels, and I'm going to come to that very much. But we are using also other quantitative methods, propensity score matching and difference in difference analysis, machine learning algorithms, and so forth, in trying to really understand how GEF produces results. We've been in this geospatial and remote sensing work, we've been collaborating, and we continue to collaborate, for example, with NASA in using satellite imagery, and also with the University of Maryland geographers in using satellite imagery and time series data to understand, to see what has actually happened on the ground. So a good example of this would be our value for money analysis of GEF land degradation projects, which is an effort to quantify the amount of carbon sequestered in land degradation projects. And it's based on a scientific approach which brings together geospatial science, econometrics, and ecology. we haven't invented any of this, but I believe that we are the first ones to use it in evaluation. And the idea here is that we talk to GEF folks, some of you are here in the room, and they say that, yeah, okay, GEF works in all of these focal areas, but it has so much impact that doesn't go recorded, because, you know, it goes outside of the project objective. So you have this multi-perspective things that, you know, in this case. So we wanted to verify, for example, whether land degradation projects do have impacts on climate through carbon sequestration. So this is an quantitative analysis of trying to verify this, and using 3 different indicators, which are vegetation productivity, forest fragmentation, and forest cover change. These are things that you can see from satellite data. And then we used a value transfer approach to translate the carbon sequestered into a monetary value. So you'll see interesting findings. So what we did first, we used a geocoded data set prepared with the assistance of AID data, which represents the GEF land degradation project spanning from January 2002 until January 2014. So there's 202 projects altogether with 446 locations that were used with exact geographic information, location information available. And what you actually see here is that you have 1,700 locations where these projects operated. And we included a potential control case within 50 kilometers from the existing GEF project. And for each of these sites, we calculate the outcome measures of vegetation productivity, forest cover change, and fragmentation. So, to summarize the methods we used, we geocoded the exact location. We used satellite outcome measurements to capture fluctuations in natural capital, vegetation productivity, forest fragmentation, carbon stock and sequestration, and land cover change. We integrated, in this case, data from a variety of sources, such as long-term climate data from the University of Delaware, which provided then precipitation and temperature data at the monthly time step for the data record. And we used population data retrieved from Columbia University season group, which was specifically leveraging the gridded population of the world data record. And we used slope and elevation data, which was derived from shuttle radar topography mission. We used such measures as distance to rivers, which was calculated based on U.S. Geological Survey's hydrosheds database and so forth, distance to roads and so forth. There's a lot of these variables, and I don't have to go into all of them. We also use nighttime lights, which is a very robust method actually to estimating economic development and so on. And we developed causal trees as decision trees that give us the important factors that are correlated with the impact variable, and using a fairly complex process here. So based on all of this analysis, so we then estimate the absolute impact in terms of sequestered carbon for each location, as each of these impact variables can be represented in terms of carbon sequestration and empirical formulas. So what did we find then? So we had findings about location. So for example, we could see that there was basically an positive increase in the NDVI, the normalized difference vegetation index, between the past 30 years that we were looking into. And all of the GEF land degradation projects were basically within 25 kilometers of a designated protected area. And they tended to be in low population density areas and areas where you had low electrification rates, hence the night light analysis. And the physical geographical characteristics of the GEF, of the areas where GEF operates, are highly variable in terms of temperature, precipitation, elevation, and slope, ranging from 500 meters above sea level to all up to 5,000 meters. But not all of these GEF projects are located in areas where there is even any forest cover. So this is basically, you know, this describes where these projects operate. Then we moved into causal tree analysis, and now I expect you to read line 4, box 6 from the left, maybe. I don't. But the point is that we then started isolating how the causal effects of an intervention vary across the key parameters.
It's also, of course, very appropriate that you call this causal trees for the forest degradation.
Right. Yeah. This is the vegetation index, basically. And we did that for other. But so following that thing, so we could again find determining factors that what happened. So basically, the projects have had, in general, a positive impact. But the projects in closer proximity to urban areas tended to be less effective than those further away. I guess that makes sense in some ways. The period of time after project implementation was meaningful, with evidence suggesting that you needed at least 5.5 years as a sort of like we found that the 5.5 years was the important threshold that determined impact, basically. With less than that time, the impact was lesser. Multifocal area projects were associated with better outcomes. So basically, projects that had to do not only with land degradation, but also with biodiversity conservation and climate change. And you could also, this is another kind of a interesting but, you know, intuitive thing, is that when you start from a lower starting point, from lower baseline, you have higher impact in general. And then the environmental factors, you know, slope, temperature, elevation, and so forth, and other economic infrastructure characteristics and so forth, were all important in influencing the impact of the projects. On the forest cover, we found again that, you know, you had to have this 4.5 years, which of 5.5 years when it comes to vegetation, 4.5 years for forest cover, before you can start showing effect on deforestation. Here, interestingly, actually the projects that were closer to urban areas were more successful in mitigating forest cover loss. we can only hypothesize why this is the case, but it might be that they are better protected or better controlling for illegal activity and so forth, because you're closer to where enforcement agencies are and so on. But basically, so these are interesting findings. Then we estimated the valuations of this, actually of carbon sequestered by each of the GEF projects, and basically here the larger the circle, so obviously the larger the impact also. So you see some geographical variation also. So what did we actually find is that over this 10-year period, there was a GEF strategy which dovetailed the UN Convention on Desertification strategy to streamline investments in sustainable land management, and we looked into it, and we found that there were on the average 43.5 tons of carbon sequestered per hectare by these projects, and because the projects had multiple locations and and of course large areas, so there were about more than 100,000 tons of carbon sequestered per project location, and this added up to about $7.5 million worth of carbon sequestered per project, which is pretty cool when you think that that the average size of the projects is about $4.5 million. So you get only in carbon sequestration, you get $7.5 million benefits, and bearing in mind that the carbon sequestration is not the main objective of this project. So these are kind of additional, often unrecorded benefits. So we hope that we will be using this approach much in the future also, and the GEF Secretariat has already decided that they will be using this same kind of approach a priori or ex ante in defining where they will be working on projects. So the beauty of it is that you can use it both as an evaluation method at the end of the cycle, but you can also use it as a planning method for where do you put your projects, for example. Another completed study focused on the international waters portfolio of the GEF, which you see the figures here. This is over the GEF international waters strategy was approved in 1995. So in the past 20 years, we have had almost 300 projects with 1.6 billion of GEF funding and a remarkable more than 10 billion in co-financing. This is actually also a finding that the international waters programs have the highest co-financing ratio of any GEF work. Just some figures, but the point is that UNDP is one of the main, and these were the original GEF implementing agencies, UNDP, UNEP, and the World Bank, and they continue to dominate the scene in international waters. So we did a thorough portfolio analysis which looked into what GEF is financing. So stress reduction work on water bodies is the most dominant type of project, and 2/3 of the projects are addressing stress reduction, and this has been going up. The foundational projects, which are these, some of you will know what the TDA means, but you know, these kind of things where you actually bring the countries together and agree on a scientifically based transboundary diagnostic analysis and what it leads into, where you actually scientifically look into what are the stressors to the water body, and then get countries to agree to work on around those things. They were dominating in the beginning of the GEF, but now they have been going down. There's been a huge increase in fisheries and in marine work, and this is probably explainable by the fact that for the agencies, you know, the fisheries work and marine work is usually less politically sensitive, and it's easier to get the countries to cooperate on these things, and so for the agencies who do the project development, for them it's probably a easier path to travel. But this has come at the cost of river basin work, and groundwater work has been very, very low actually, which is part of the strategy, but there have been not very many projects in the groundwater area. But we found basically that the international waters portfolio is highly relevant to contemporary concerns regarding regional security, transboundary waters, and they have been basically responsive to evolving context, with some of these exceptions, you know, like the thing about groundwater I mentioned that has gone down, and which has never taken off very much, but there's also a new GEF 6 priority that was set up a few years ago, which was on high altitude glaciers, and not a single project has been developed in this area. So that's something. Just as we are in the UN, so we gotta get the SDGs on screen, and they are here basically to demonstrate how responsive how important the international waters area is for many SDGs. I mean, you have a goal 6 on fresh water, but you know, apart from that, and you have goal 14 on marine resources. But apart from that, you have goal 2 on food security, 7 on clean energy, and others. So basically, you can map what we did. We mapped all of the IW contributions against these things. From project level databases, we could verify that the performance has been largely satisfactory and more or less in the same level as the rest of GEF work. And obviously the area has had, I mean, IW has had lots of contributions to many water bodies actually. And in the interest of time, I will not go through it, and maybe those who are watching this on the screen elsewhere will see the slide better than the ones in the room. But basically, there's lots of different in the international waters area. So GEF is not a financial mechanism to any particular convention like it is to the biodiversity or the climate change conventions, but it has contributed significantly to a lot of global and regional conventions and agreements around different water bodies, including things like the Global Ballast Water Convention and the Pacific Tuna Treaty and for example, the establishment of a intergovernmental commissions around the Benguela current in Africa. Not everything is rosy though. Well, basically, I've already said most of this thing that, that it's been responsive to many things, but not everything is roses. You have basically in real terms, you have had a declining envelope, which is probably related to the fact that it is not that GEF is not a convention financial mechanism, and the other fact that it's more difficult for agencies and for countries to bring together countries to collaborate, because these are not projects that can be dealt in a single jurisdiction. I mentioned that there has been this increased dominance of marine and ocean investments, which are definitely important, but if it comes at the cost of the freshwater basins, which we know are extremely important from a, environmental, but also political, social, and economic reasons. One of the challenges is that the agencies don't get funding from GEF for project or program preparation, and in these kind of a multi-country politically sensitive projects, that is a limitation. And finally, many of the agencies were unhappy with the fact that the GEF has not involved them in the later years adequately in strategic development of this area. Okay, here's an example of how we have been evaluating. So, Lake Victoria, the second largest water body in the world, freshwater body in the world, shared by Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, with Rwanda and Burundi upstream in the basin, in the catchment area. Huge resource, obviously, for humans also, and there's millions of people living in the basin who are dependent on the Lake Victoria for their livelihoods, for food security and everything. So Lake Victoria had a tremendous infestation of water hyacinth. And I've been to this basin over the years many times. And I remember my first ever mission with GEF was to Lake Victoria in 2000. And that was when the infestation was about the worst. And you can the water hyacinth was so thick that the coastal communities who were dependent on their fisheries for their food had absolutely no way of getting their boats on the lake. It was so thick, that water hyacinth, for hundreds of meters into the lake. No way of getting there. So there were all kinds of efforts to try to control the water hyacinth, with industrial quality cutters to biological control measures and so on. GEF has had 3 projects, successive projects in this area, which you may see in this, perhaps the red line in between the map and the graph. And these projects were all implemented by the World Bank, and they were all addressing the major threats to the ecosystem, and including the clearance of the water hyacinth. So you had different kinds of strategies in trying to control the water hyacinth. You can see from the time series in the maps as well as the graph that during these project periods, the water hyacinth infestation was actually getting worse until you had a adequate time and some technological breakthroughs, including using a mite that only eats water hyacinth. And when the water hyacinth is gone, it dies. And this was scientifically tested by the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, IITA, that this is not dangerous and not harmful. So after many years and during the third project, so you would actually start seeing a decline in the water hyacinth. And if you see in the map, so in the last one here to the right, the lake is getting pretty clear already. So we used remote sensing methods to see the changes in this hyacinth infestation, and used again the vegetation index, the NDVI, to show that the overall vegetation in the lake had increased until 2008, and then has started to decrease. And controlling for other measures, you can actually, with pretty good certainty, you can claim that that the GEF projects have at least contributed to this thing. But again, you can see one of the things that there's a long time lag, and this is the whole thing about these ecological projects, that you cannot expect to see impacts within 3-4 years. You have to wait much longer, and that of course with funders and others having a short attention span is sometimes a challenge, but you have to do that. Okay, I'm really actually running out of time, but not, unfortunately, not out of
we will wish to allow for some time for exchange with the group here and online too, but we will give you 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we can go till 1:45, if that's okay.
Okay, so I'm well. Now that you're so generous, so I'll go back, and just quickly. So one of the things is that we are looking into GEF's engagement with the private sector, and this is the council and the CEO have betted a lot on the private sector involvement and to be able to take things up to scale. We did a survey of basically 60 respondents. So this is a bias survey, but that many out of these 60 entities, so the private sector basically cites that the environmental concerns are a major concern for them, and for their own bottom line, of course. They don't, forget about corporate social responsibility, which is basically perhaps a sham, but the companies are seeing that the environmental constraints are coming to face them, and they will invest more into it. So what role do they see for GEF? One aspect that emerged in our findings, as preeminent was that companies would like to have risk-sharing mechanisms, for example, loan guarantees that would take risk away from them when they are investing in new environmental work, and also that they would really like to see GEF and the public sector in general to create a level playing field with regulations and laws and legal frameworks to enable them to invest in environmental
You are on Redux. I'm going to throw to the, if you were at a kind of a natural point in your presentation, I'm going to open for the floor for by way of questions, if you don't mind, in the interest of making sure that we have time. I want to kick us off. First of all, the reflection that is we're envious of you possessing the sort of physical, observable, quantitative data sets, which we could apply equally to our arena. But what I wanted to throw to you as one critical question, whilst others compose themselves for theirs, is there something to difference between correlation and causality here? Is there something to the possibility that your funding goes in directions where there are already things going on? I presume national authorities, other partners, and is there a possibility that one can read this to overemphasize the attribution to GEF itself?
It's a good question, and we've been trying to obviously control for these kind of questions. And for example, in the protected areas impact evaluation that we did jointly with you guys at UNDP, IEO, we did take control groups, and we looked at the large number of protected areas that were either supported by the GEF or were not supported by GEF. So we made a great effort in trying to identify relevant controls. So you would then control also that the protected areas that you were comparing with were in similar biomes and similar ecosystems and at the same distance from urban centers or so forth, so that we would be comparing apples and apples. The analysis still showed that the GEF approach had been often more successful than the non-GEF approach, with exceptions. And one of the exceptions was, for example, that comes to mind, which was a most striking, was that Mexico was one of our case studies, and that it was a key case study for the reason that GEF has a long history of protected areas work in Mexico with the government, and which has been mutually reinforcing. And the picture was pretty good altogether, except then that when it came to mangrove forests, actually the GEF projects were less successful than other. And you can speculate why these are. These are probably mangroves that are close to tourist areas, in Cancun and all of this kind of thing. So you have factors, but then you really could see how important it is that you are working with the government, and that the government is really committed to these things, and that you have to also work with the productive sectors, notably mining and forestry and so forth, to be able to see. But yeah, so your question is valid, but we try to control for these kind of things. Now, just one generic thing is the fact that so you can try to go after low-hanging fruit, and you can try to develop projects that are sure to succeed because you know that they have succeeded before and elsewhere and so forth. But at the same time, then, when we are talking about fairly limited funding here, so the GEF is supposed to be kind of a venture capital. So they're supposed to go to areas where you can, where you innovate. And we probably see too little of that. And there's incentives maybe against it, because you do have to, donors and others are expecting high success rates. And if you want high success rates, you don't try to do something totally new. So one of the things that we want to do now in the next phase, really, in my high up on my personal agenda, is to try to develop measurements of innovation, which says that even in the council meeting 2 weeks ago, so one council member, one donor said that, what is GEF going to do? That they say that your evaluation office says that 30% of your projects are only moderately satisfactory. How do you take it? How do you take it higher? And to me, that's a wrong question, because if you want to innovate, 30% of moderately satisfactory is pretty good. And we have to find measurements that allow you to fail and which allow us to test more methods and so on.
Please, floor open. Please, in front there, Sula.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Juha, for this very, very inspiring talk. And it's so exciting to see the introduction of the new technologies into project designing and evaluation, and you have demonstrated today in the talk and how you have done it. I think it's like a kind of ground path breaking in the studies, and it's really wonderful to see how much we can improve in terms of measurements and accuracy of the measurements. My question though is, this is the evaluation of global environment facilities project, and then you have focused very much on the geospatial data and on the project site information and how it has evolved over the years. But we know the fundamental cause of environmental degradation actually comes from the human society. So it's connecting with Ariel's question of the causes of the movement of the environmental status. So I think it's like by using these new technologies, very exciting. But I think the human story is kind of, from here, it's somehow missing, what are the social, political, cultural contexts that have contributed to the success or non-success of the project in terms of the utility of evaluation. And for project manager myself, I think it would be very interesting and useful to see the human story behind it. So maybe something you can comment. And I have a second question, if you allow. In terms of the measurement that you have, land degradation, your control variable is like 25 miles or 50 miles from your original site of GEF intervention, right? I think maybe it is quite a valid approach. It's not perfect, but it's pretty valid. But in terms of biodiversity focal area, because the selection of that biodiversity project is dependent on the high biodiversity indicators in that area. So your chances are you're going to our intervention, in fact, already happening in the high biodiversity area. So how do you control that if you select an area 50 miles away from the intervention area, which has a low biodiversity, lower forest coverage to start with? And that is something I think we can have your team can also try to control the variable.
Thank you, Sulan. To allow you a little bit of space, I'm sure he could talk about any of these at some length. I'm going to take a couple of more questions and allow him to compose himself, please. Please introduce yourself for the benefit of the online audience.
kind of value for money with respect to land degradation programs. Efficiency in generally and VFM, these are very gray areas in the kind of evaluations they do. You can briefly point at, what is your experience in terms of efficiency and VFM.
Great, thanks. So, of course, your presentation talked about application of innovations to environmental projects, which are a bit unique in the broader span of work that UNEP does. But still, you highlighted things that were relevant to UNEP's broader work around the strategic plan going forward. But one of them looking at risk or measures that will allow you to innovate, innovative, things that are beyond environmental work per se that could also be used in UNEP more broadly around the strategic plan. But another area I wanted, if you could talk a bit more about, you mentioned that one of the findings was that, again, it's not specific to environmental work, that sometimes results and impact take more time than a typical project cycle, or in this case, a 4-year, whether it's a 4-year GEF cycle or 4-year UNEP strategic plan cycle. So a bit more about how internally, perhaps, you're, aside from just sharing the results, how you're working with council members and GEF secretariat colleagues to make the case for a more rationalized way of reporting back, not just on each consecutive 4-year plan in the case of UTP, for example, but something that allows you to look back and learn from and share successes from previous strategic plans where the impact is a lag time, for example. So a bit more, if you could talk more about what you do in that from this.
Okay, we'll just let the online people put up a hand. I believe if they have questions. Meanwhile, you are, please, your reflections.
Okay, so in this presentation, I basically focused on some of the innovations, and the innovations are maybe in the geospatial sphere and so forth. So I didn't talk much about the traditional evaluation work that we do, where we still go into field sites and we talk to people and we do focus groups and we visit sites and so forth. That's very much a part of what we are doing. Now, in all of these things, so obviously, like Sulan was pointing out, so you would, without the humans, there would be a few threats to the natural world, right? Maybe an asteroid every now and then. So obviously, the whole thing has to be focusing on how do we deal with the drivers of global environmental change, and the drivers are firmly in the areas of social and economic issues, basically, and people's relationship with the natural resources, basically. And the GEF strategy, apart from the evaluation, the GEF strategy over the 25 years has really moved from focus on purely the technical and technological solutions to more to a sustainable development approach, which I think is very important. Maybe I'll leave those very technical questions that Sulan and Krishna had, and we can talk about it afterwards. But Tim's point about how do you deal with this in a political environment, and how do you sell the ideas of long project gestation periods and all of that to people who have short attention spans, basically. And I think that we are, the challenge is the council members, for example, who are representing countries, they understand the issues. Their challenge is then to be able to go to their politicians to sell the idea that you have to, that you cannot actually see the environmental changes so quickly. I remember I was in Budapest years ago on an international waters thing, and one of the people there said that GEF has invested so much into the Black Sea and the Danube, and you go outside and you see that the Danube is still not clean. Well, yeah, right, but you have to sort of like take the longer term perspective, and the interesting thing is that so OPS 6, the sixth performance evaluation of the GEF. Obviously, I mean, we are supposed to inform the next replenishment and look into projects from the OPS 6 period. But obviously, most of the projects that are coming to close now are from GEF 4 and GEF 5, and some from GEF 3. So there's an inevitable time lag. So you have a hard time actually to evaluate what has been initiated a couple of years ago and so on. But you have to be upfront about it and explain it to the funders and others interested stakeholders. Now, if you allow me, so I have one more slide, which is this upcoming opportunities for collaboration in the context of OPS 6. So we have to evaluate the new integrated approach pilots that GEF has started in areas such as food security in Africa, taking deforestation out of commodity chains, basically looking at, here's a nice bit of trivia, is also that basically 3 commodities, soybean, beef cattle, and palm oil, account for 80% of tropical deforestation in the world. So GEF is trying to, and this is an area where GEF is really trying to work on the drivers of environmental change. And we have also then other programs on sustainable cities, illegal wildlife trade, fisheries, and the Amazon, for example. And I would like to put forth a call for collaboration between evaluation offices here in these areas. GEF has 18 agencies, of which UNEG members, several of you, I mean UNDP, UNEP, IFAD, FAO, UNIDO are partners. And for example, the commodities program is coordinated by UNDP. I hope that we would have a natural partnership in collaborating in all of these evaluations also. Mind you, it's not going to be easy because none of these, you will not, in these programs, for example, you will not see anything completed at the field level because the projects have just been approved. But there's a huge interest from the council on their success. So we will have to look into whether they have been bringing something new to the table, new approaches, partnerships, processes, inclusive processes, and so forth. So if you are interested in collaborating, please raise your hand now.
Let me jump in with a question from online. It's Javier at UNIDO, who's asking if there are more experiences on the rapid impact assessment or other initiatives in GEF IEO to further apply this method. Speak a little bit more to the rapid impact assessment. I was piqued by the approach of the systematic triangulation or expert judgment, and can you speak a little bit more to that?
Okay, and Javier probably knows more about it than I do, because this is has been done in context of a set of projects where UNIDO has been a lead agency actually in Southeast Asia. But and we haven't used it very systematically before this. This is the first time that we are, well, we tried to use it in the past, But this is the first concerted effort where we are using it. And like I mentioned, so it's Andy Rowe from Canada who has been pioneering this work, and the Treasury Board of Canada has taken it up as a major focus of their evaluation. So basically, in a nutshell, it's a theory-based approach. So you you tease out the theory of the set of interventions that you're talking about, and you so analyze basically why the project proponents and so on think that this will lead into lasting change, and you validate that, and you then interview adequate group of different stakeholders. So you can have people at the national level in the area where you are working, who are experts in the area and who are maybe involved in the implementation of the projects or the set of projects or the program, and you get their perspectives on how you think that the intervention is leading to a lasting change. And you take another group who can be national experts in the field in that area again, and you do the same, and you take a third group which can be global experts in the area, and you triangulate their perspectives. The important thing is also that you have different perspectives from where people come from. So you can, if you are talking about natural resources management, for example, so you can have people who are users of the natural resources, and you have people who are conservationists, and so forth. You have different value systems that you take into account that. So when you have adequately large numbers of people, in a way it's a little bit like a Delphi method in a sense, but you define your expert groups differently, and you have the three groups always present. And if you have adequately large numbers of informed people, you can arrive at a triangulated idea of how an intervention is leading towards an impact.
Okay, thank you very much. I suggest this has, of course, brought forth, I'm sure, many further reflections we could be happily entertained for the whole afternoon, but for the interest of form and knowing that people have 2 o'clock commitments, I'd suggest we draw the line there. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the engagement on behalf of everybody here and online. Let's give you a hand. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.